Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true.
Tremendous population control program the world has ever seen. This was particularly barbaric because it involved the forced abortion and forced sterilization of women at all stages in pregnancy, including in the third trimester of pregnancy. I was an eyewitness to these crimes in China. I was a rather stunned eyewitness, I have to admit. I had gone to China, that abortion was a woman's choice. I had gone to China thinking that China needed, above all else, population control in order to develop economically. That I had been taught them in part at Stanford University. We sent investigators into China, and we sent investigators to a model county program run by the United Nations Population Fund. And the United Nations Population Fund had been telling us wonderful things about its model county programs in China. It said we have 32 counties in China out of China's 3,000 counties, 32 that the Chinese government has given us to run family planning programs in. And in our counties, our model counties, there is no coercion. Women are free to choose the timing and spacing of their pregnancies. There's no forced abortion, no forced sterilization. There are no targets, no quotas for sterilizations or anything else. Everything is wonderful here. It's a client-centered program. Well, we decided to test that claim. So we went to a county in southern China, in Guangdong Province, Sihui County, and looked into the UNFPA's model county program there. What do you think we found? We found forced abortion, forced sterilization, targets, quotas. Women laughed. They laughed when we said, "Are you free to choose the timing and spacing of your your childbirthing?" I said, "No." So we proved the United Nations Population Fund had simply lied about what it was doing in China. The one-child policy began when I was in China, and you might think that the one-child policy is a typical expression of totalitarian exuberance, right? We have a one-party dictatorship, the vanguard of the proletariat, deciding for the Chinese people how many children they're going to have, namely one, and then going beyond that to lay down very detailed bureaucratic procedures enforced by tens of millions of little bureaucrats throughout the country who are given enormous powers to arrest and detain and sterilize and abort people. Well, that's certainly part of the story. But the story of China's one-child policy really begins with the Club of Rome report by Meadows et al. In 1974. You remember the Club of Rome report purported to use control theory, systems engineering, and a number of unfounded assumptions to predict that the world was going to cease to exist, at least as a habitable planet, by the year 2080. Well, it turned out that that was all a hoax. The chief author of the report, 2 years later in 1976, admitted that they had exaggerated for effect. Asked why, they said, well, we needed to get the attention of Western governments so that people would begin paying attention to the problem of population growth and resource depletion. So they exaggerated for effect. They pulled a little hoax, in other words, a scientific hoax, on the world community. And the Chinese leadership from Deng Xiaoping on down was very impressed. And they were impressed because science and technology was what they wanted. That was the first of the four modernizations that they talked about. They wanted to make China into a strong and powerful nation, a nation with a strong and advanced technology, a nation with a strong and dominant military. And so they swallowed this nonsense. And what did Song Jian say precisely? He said, well, given current levels of population growth in China, China will face economic collapse within 100 years, in the year 2080. And so we must lower the birth rate down to one child per couple in order to avoid this calamity. And that's exactly what the leadership did. So when we talk about 10 million women being forcibly aborted in China every year, roughly equal numbers of women being sterilized, having IUDs inserted. We have to remember that the Chinese state doesn't bear sole responsibility for this, but the people in the West who propagated the myth of overpopulation, people like the authors of Limits to Growth, people like Paul Ehrlich, about whom we were talking over dinner, they bear a terrible responsibility for the decisions that were made by the People's Republic of China. But women and children in China, especially girl children in China, have been dying in earnest because of that hoax for the last 20 years. There was a young woman doctor on duty in China. The date was December 24th. This was a few years ago. And she had the night shift. She was an OBGYN. She had been a doctor for just about 9 months and was working in a large hospital in southern China, not far from Hong Kong, inside of Guangdong province. She had had a busy night. I think she delivered a couple of babies already and had gone to rest for a minute in the cot set aside for that purpose when the nurse came pounding on the door saying, "We have a problem, come quick." Well, the problem was a baby, about 33 weeks gestation, 7 months along, baby boy had been born after a failed abortion. And the nurses had the baby on the cold stone floor and had a hypodermic and a syringe ready for the doctor when she came in. The syringe was filled with formaldehyde, and she was expected to take the syringe, which was fitted with a hypodermic needle, and inject it through the fontanelle, through the soft spot in the child's skull, to kill the baby. She was expected to administer the coup de grace, infanticide, and she refused to do it. She picked the baby up, wrapped the baby up, put the baby on a warming table, because these things are done in the same maternity ward. The killings are done in the same maternity ward where the babies are cared for. So the baby was breathing just fine, and what if the main problem you expect at that gestational age are respiratory. So the baby was doing fine, but the hospital supervisor was called in, and the hospital supervisor yelled at Dr. Yang and said, "You're violating government policy," and picked up the hypodermic syringe and went to give the injection. And Dr. Yang, our young Chinese doctor, knocked the syringe out of her hand. Now she was really in trouble. She was really in trouble because China's birth control regulations say that anyone who interferes with the population control program will be punished, and anyone who interferes with the population control program seriously will be punished seriously. You don't want to be punished seriously in China. That means that's bad news. She was sent into internal exile rather than to the Chinese gulag because she was a doctor, and I think the state didn't want to waste her talents completely by sending her to a labor camp. So they sent her to a remote mountain village in northern Guangdong province. And she was placed under the guidance and surveillance of the local Communist Party branch. She was in charge of the village medical clinic during the day, but she couldn't leave. She wasn't allowed to travel. She was basically under house arrest. And being a woman alone in a strange village with no male relatives around, she was repeatedly violated. She finally managed to escape from there and make her way to Hong Kong and to the United States, where she applied for political asylum. The asylum judge was on the verge of denying her claim because he didn't believe it. He found it incredible. He denied that these things could be happening anywhere in the world, in China or anywhere else. That was when I got involved. I went up to San Francisco. Asylum adjudication process takes place in a courtroom, and it's like a regular court procedure. So I was sworn in, and from the witness stand, spent the next 2 hours explaining to this judge who worked for the INS that these things, in fact, not only do happen in China, but they happen in China on a daily basis. And here's the evidence. And so reluctantly, he finally granted her claim because she had been expected to kill a human being and had interfered with someone else when they attempted that same murder. The baby, after she was arrested, of course, the baby was killed anyway, so all of her efforts went for naught. But those sorts of things happen all the time in China. I once interviewed the head of a large military hospital in South China. He was a very congenial sort, very forthcoming. I asked him about the birth control program, and I said, is it ever the case that women come into your hospital, in labor, about to give birth to illegal children? And he said, yes, it happens all the time. They're brought in. If a woman is found hiding in an alleyway or hiding out in a village and she's very close to term or in labor, she's immediately brought into the hospital so we can deal with it. Well, how do you deal with it? He said, well, we wait until the cervix is fully dilated and the baby's head is crowning, the normal presentation. And then we take a hypodermic syringe, and he went through the whole procedure. We fill it with formaldehyde or alcohol, and then we give a lethal injection. And I said, isn't that considered infanticide? And he said, oh, no. Oh no, he said, not in China. He said, in China, abortion is legal up to the point of parturition. So that as long as the baby had one foot in the womb, as it were, this was a legal procedure. Well, in fact, babies are killed after birth as well, because doctors and nurses are under such pressure not to allow illegal children to see the light of day, and they don't want to get in trouble, that they will give lethal injections after birth, as Dr. Yang's supervisor. Defective babies are more often killed than not. There is a eugenics component to China's one-child policy. And it's something that, you know, the Chinese people now take very seriously. They know they're only allowed one child. They want their only child to be male, for the most part, and they want the little boy to be perfect. And if there are any obvious deformities, cleft palate or clubfoot, even those that are easily surgically correctable, even I have heard of babies being killed because they had birthmarks on their face. Babies are simply executed, and the parents go back and try again, because the government tells them relentlessly and ceaselessly, we want to improve the quality of the Chinese people. The orphanages are filled with little girls and handicapped children, both of whom have been, both classes of little babies are abandoned, of course. The fate of twins. The fate of twins can be, twins can suffer one of three fates. They can both be killed. When I was in the village in China in 1980, there was a woman who was pregnant in a neighboring village. They didn't have an ultrasound machine. They didn't know she was carrying twins. She had no prenatal care whatsoever. I mean, they were avoiding the family planning authorities. But the local party official arrested her, had her arrested, and took her in when she was 7.5 months pregnant. And the abortion was immediately done at the local hospital. They do these abortions by cesarean section, by the way. They normally give a lethal injection into the uterus, which is supposed to cause the death of the unborn child, and within 24 to 48 hours bring on uterine contractions, and the now dead baby is then ejected from the womb. When this doesn't happen, instead of going in vaginally and trying to take the baby out piecemeal, they do a cesarean section and remove the now dead baby. This woman was found to be carrying twins. Now, the family had a little girl already, and they'd been hoping for a boy. And the fact that it was twin boys was just a monstrous tragedy in the eyes of everyone in the village. The father of the woman who was aborted lost his mind, and went over to the local village head's house, went over to the house of the fellow who had his wife arrested, and took the man's two sons, who I think were 10 and 8, and threw them down a well, and then jumped in himself. So it was a double murder and a suicide. And the wells in this part of China are very narrow and deep, and you know, once you're, there's no way to get back out. So both of them are killed. One of them might be allowed to live. That's the second alternative. There are cases where a woman has been asked, which one do you want? Which is a choice that nobody should have to make, where your children are concerned. And in some cases, you know, the twins have been allowed to live. But there are punishments for having an illegal second child, and people who break the rules are fined heavily. And the second child, whether it be twins or a second child conceived and born several years later, a second child, an illegal child, is always going to be an unregistered non-person in Chinese society. They're called hei hukou. Hei means black, which has no reference to melanin, skin color. It's a reference to the fact that these people are not recognized by the law, cannot get any government benefits, cannot get a government job, cannot get access to any government services whatsoever. That's unjust, of course. I mean, why should the sins of the fathers be visited upon the children? The children have done nothing wrong, and yet they're stigmatized, and they're going to be second-class citizens, actually no-class citizens, zero-class citizens the rest of their lives.